His hands didn't ask. They claimed. He didn't kiss me like a man in love. He kissed me like a man who already owned every inch of me, and was reminding me of it. I wasn't ready. But my body didn't wait for permission. Not when he leaned close and whispered, "You're mine, Elena. You always have been." And in that moment, between the sheets we didn't mean to share, I stopped wondering how I got here, and started wondering why I didn't run. If that pulled you in, stay a while. Like this video, and subscribe for more quiet stories that say what most of us never dare to. Thank you for being here. People say life changes in a moment. But in mine, it changed in a silence. It was the kind of silence that doesn't happen by accident. It was chosen, measured, polite, expensive. The night before my wedding, I sat alone in a room filled with gifts I hadn't asked for. Silk robe, white orchids, champagne in a silver bucket that hadn't been touched. I listened to the tick of an antique clock, a hollow sound that somehow felt louder than my own breath. No one knocked on the door to check on me. No bridesmaids, no mother fussing with my hair, no father giving me away. It was just me, a reflection in the mirror, and the name I was about to take, Whitmore. I hadn't grown up dreaming of a wedding, but I'd imagined love would feel warmer than this. Graham Whitmore wasn't a stranger, not exactly, but he wasn't someone I knew. We'd met 3 times. Once through my mother's lawyer, once at his office, glass walls, dark wood, the sharp scent of expensive coffee. And once, over dinner, when he slid a contract across the table and asked if I would consider a partnership. "It's not romantic," he said, his tone cool, like he was reading numbers off a screen. "It's responsible." He needed a wife, for reasons I never fully understood. A matter of inheritance, corporate optics, perhaps just convenience. I needed money, not for me. For my mother's treatment, and my little brother Ben, whose world still spun in innocence. The deal was clear. A year-long marriage, privacy respected. No physical expectations, no public drama. He promised security. I promised silence. It wasn't love. It was survival. And I said yes. The wedding took place in a private cathedral in Manhattan. It was beautiful in the way cold things sometimes are, symmetrical, immaculate, and distant. I wore a dress chosen by someone else, a cream satin gown with long sleeves and no lace, understated, elegant, designed not to draw attention. Graham, on the other hand, looked like he belonged in that world, his suit tailored to perfection, hair slightly graying at the temples, jaw sharp enough to cut glass. He didn't look at me as I walked down the aisle. No music played. No guests smiled. No one cried. The ceremony moved quickly, like a formality, being filed, the efficient red words that meant little to either of us. "Do you, Graham Whitmore, take Elena Harper?" "I do." No pause. No glance. Just 2 words spoken like an instruction. "Elena? I will try." I wasn't sure why I said that. Maybe because I didn't want to lie. Then came the part I hadn't expected. He held out his hand for mine. I placed my fingers in his. I expected them to be cold. They weren't. They were firm, measured, just like everything else about him. But then, for a second, a heartbeat, maybe 2, he didn't let go. He was supposed to. The moment had passed, but his thumb brushed the edge of my palm. Subtle, almost imperceptible. When I looked up, his eyes met mine, and something flickered. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't affection. But it was something. A fracture in the armor. Then it was gone. He released my hand. We exchanged rings. There was no kiss. Just silence. Again. Back in the car, I sat beside him like a ghost in white. Neither of us spoke. Outside the window, New York rushed by in streaks of gray and gold. Taxi horns, street lights, people living lives full of noise and chaos, lives that felt impossibly far from mine. I glanced at Graham. He was watching the skyline like it owed him something. His jaw clenched, his hands folded neatly in his lap. I didn't expect conversation, but something inside me still asked. "Why me?" I asked softly. "Because you said yes," he replied. I turned back to the window, biting my tongue. Because I said yes. Not because I mattered, not because he saw anything in me. Just because I agreed. I wondered if he even remembered my birthday, my favorite color, the fact that I always leave one light on at night, even when I sleep. Probably not. But then I thought of that moment, the one he didn't have to give, that extra second, that almost touch. He hadn't looked at me down the aisle, but he hadn't let go either. And somehow, that haunted me more than if he had. Later that night, after the dinner neither of us ate, and the toasts that were never made, I sat alone in our new home, a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the Hudson. He went to his study. I went to a guest room, and I took off my dress without ceremony. But before I climbed into bed, I opened the small jewelry box on the nightstand. Inside was a necklace. Not diamonds, not pearls. Just a single silver chain, with a charm shaped like a key. There was no note. I didn't know if it was from him. I didn't know if it meant anything. But I put it on. And for the first time that day, I let myself feel something. Not hope. Not regret. Just the simple ache of being seen for a moment, even if the moment wasn't real. There are houses that feel alive. You open the door, and the air carries memories, bacon grease on Sunday mornings, a radio humming in the kitchen, someone humming just a little off-key upstairs. This wasn't one of those houses. Graham's penthouse was beautiful in the way art galleries are beautiful. Every line was perfect, every object placed with intention. But nothing here breathed. The marble floors were silent under my bare feet. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, showing off the Manhattan skyline like a prize no one knew how to hold. There were no photos, no books with creased spines, no blankets left on chairs, just order. Cold, elegant, exhausting order. I stood in the hallway outside my guest bedroom. Yes, my own room, because it would be more comfortable that way, Graham had said, and listened for something. A sign of life, a voice, even footsteps. Nothing. The only thing I heard was the ticking of a minimalist clock and the distant whir of city traffic through soundproof glass. I went exploring, not out of curiosity, but because I was afraid if I stayed still, I'd start to disappear. The kitchen was sleek, stainless, unused. There was a single coffee cup drying by the sink. It was black ceramic, chipped at the rim. It didn't match the rest of the dishware. Something about that cup made me stop. In a place where everything was curated, that cup didn't belong. And yet, it stayed. I opened a cabinet looking for tea, and instead found a small wooden box pushed to the back. Old, worn, out of place. I hesitated, then pulled it down. Inside was a folded letter. No envelope, no date. The paper was soft at the edges, as if it had been unfolded and refolded 100 times. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but the first line made my breath catch. I wanted to say goodbye, but you were never good at endings. I didn't read further. Whatever that letter was, it wasn't mine to read. I placed it back gently, as if it might bruise. I closed the cabinet, but I couldn't close the feeling. Who had written it? And why did he keep it? That evening we had dinner together. Or rather, We sat at opposite ends of a long oak table while plates were set in front of us by a silent housekeeper I hadn't seen before. Graham didn't speak. He cut his food with precision, chewed slowly, drank water, no wine, and kept his eyes on his plate. I wondered if he'd learned that somewhere. How to eat without making a sound. How to exist without leaving traces. When I dropped my fork by accident, the clatter echoed in the vast, silent space. I reached to pick it up, but Graham beat me to it. He bent down, lifted the utensil, then stood. Only instead of handing it to me, he walked into the kitchen himself. I heard water run. When he returned, he placed the clean fork beside my plate and sat down again. No words. Just that small act. I didn't thank him. I didn't know how. Later, I found myself on the balcony, wrapped in a sweater that didn't quite belong to me. The city looked softer from up here, less like a machine, more like a living thing with 1,000 quiet hearts beating behind windows. The sliding door opened. I didn't turn, but I felt him step beside me. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, a full arm's length away, hands in the pockets of his slacks. "You can decorate the guest room," he said suddenly. "Make it yours." I turned, startled not by the words, but the sound of his voice. Low, textured, like someone unused to saying things that weren't strictly necessary. "It's fine as it is," I replied. He nodded once. "Suit yourself." Silence stretched again. Then quietly, so quietly I wasn't sure I was, meant to hear it, he added, "You don't have to be afraid of the quiet. It's just where I keep the things I can't say." I looked at him then. Really looked. Not at the tailored suit, or the expensive watch, or the face that was too handsome for its own good, but at the space behind his eyes, the one filled with letters that were never sent. "You live in a beautiful place," I said. "It doesn't feel like home," he replied. We didn't speak again after that, but when I turned to go back inside, I saw that the black ceramic cup had been moved, washed, dried, and placed carefully on the table beside a single silver spoon. The small things mattered, after all. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I thought of my mother, how she would hum when she couldn't sleep. I thought of Ben, who would crawl into bed with me when the nightmares got bad. And I thought of Graham Whitmore, who spoke only when silence wouldn't carry the weight, who washed forks, who kept broken cups and hidden letters. A man I married, not for love, but for duty. And yet, somewhere between the marble floors and the 2 clean dishes, I felt something flicker. Not attraction, not even hope. Just the first breath of something that didn't have a name yet. The first time I sat across from Graham at that impossibly long dinner table, I realized something strange. We were always exactly the same distance apart, no matter how far I leaned, forward no matter how much I tried to meet his eyes. The space between us was more than just air. It was history, hesitation, and something heavier than either of us wanted to name. The table stretched nearly 15 feet, solid oak, polished to a mirror finish. On it sat 2 identical place settings, a small vase of white calla lilies, and the weight of 2 lives that had not chosen each other. Dinner was served by a housekeeper named Marie. She wore soft shoes and moved with the grace of someone who knew how to disappear into silence. I liked her. That night, we were served roasted chicken, buttered carrots, and warm rolls I didn't eat. I held my fork too carefully, suddenly hyper-aware of every sound my silverware made. Graham, as usual, ate in perfect quiet, each movement precise, almost meditative. He never slouched, never paused. He simply completed one task, then the next. I wondered if he ate like that when he was alone, or if perhaps he only ate like that when someone was watching. "Do you always eat in silence?" I asked, surprising even myself. Graham didn't look up. I eat to nourish. Conversation isn't required for that. I stared at my untouched roll. Still, I said. It makes things feel longer. He looked up then, just briefly. It's a long table. And somehow that made me laugh. Just a soft sound, but real. Graham blinked, like he hadn't expected it. Neither had I. After dinner, I returned to my room. It was still labeled guest room on the little brass plaque by the door, though he had told me I could change that if I wanted. I didn't. Not yet. On the nightstand sat a photograph I hadn't noticed before. It was of a woman, elegant, dark-haired, with a smile that felt like it had once lit up entire rooms. She wore a long green dress and a silver bracelet identical to the one Graham's mother had worn in the hospital. The frame was plain, nothing ornate. Just wood. Honest. There was no label, no name. But I knew who she was. Amelia. His late wife. Didn't know how long he'd kept that photo hidden, or why he'd chosen now to let me see it. I didn't touch it. I simply looked, and then I turned out the light. The next morning, I found Ben's letter in my inbox. He had scanned it in by hand, written in pencil, with his uneven print letters curling off the page. Dear Lena, I saw the photo Mom put in the hallway. You look pretty. I hope the food is good there. I think the guy you married looks like a lawyer. I think maybe lawyers are sad. Do you think he's sad? Anyway, I'm okay. I miss your soup. I smiled, and then I cried, quietly, into the sleeve of my robe. Because yes, Graham looked like a lawyer, and yes, maybe he was sad. But more than that, he looked like someone who'd stopped waiting for life to surprise him, and I didn't know how to live beside someone like that. That evening, dinner was tomato bisque and grilled cheese sandwiches. Simple, comforting, almost childlike. I didn't know who requested it, but I had a suspicion. This time, I didn't speak. I just ate. And Graham did too. Halfway through the meal, I reached for my water glass and accidentally knocked over my spoon. It clattered to the floor and rolled beneath the table. I leaned down to grab it, but Graham was faster. He rose, walked around the table, not rushed but immediate, and picked it up. He examined the spoon, then disappeared into the kitchen. When he returned, it was clean. He set it beside my bowl without a word, then sat back down. Thank you, I said softly. He didn't look up, but I saw the edge of his mouth move. Just barely. A line. A twitch. A trace of something that almost looked like kindness. Later that night, I passed his study on the way to the linen closet. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, a warm lamp glowed over a desk filled with papers. Graham sat there, glasses on, sleeves rolled up, pen tapping against his chin. I paused, not to spy, just to witness. For a moment, I didn't see the man who'd laid out a contract for marriage. I saw someone trying to work through a silence even deeper than mine. I walked away without knocking, but that image stayed with me. Not his wealth, not his power, but the quiet man at his desk who ate grilled cheese without complaint and cleaned a spoon he could have ignored. That night, I stood on the balcony again. The city lights blinked below like fireflies that had lost their rhythm. Somewhere in the apartment behind me, I heard a door open and close. And then, soft footsteps. Graham didn't say anything when he joined me. He didn't offer small talk or comments about the skyline. He just stood beside me. Not touching. Not towering. Just present. After a few minutes, he said, "You're easier to be around than I expected." I turned to him. "Is that a compliment?" His lips curved, almost imperceptibly. It's a statement. I smiled. I'll take it anyway. We stood there a while longer, breathing the same quiet air. And when I turned to go inside, I looked. Back once, just to see if he was still there. He was, not saying anything, but not leaving either. And in a house with no breath, that mattered more than I wanted to admit. There are moments when you cross a line you didn't know was there, not because someone drew it, but because you suddenly feel it beneath your feet, quiet and invisible, until it's behind you. That line, for me, was an afternoon visit to Graham's mother. Her name was Claire Whitmore, a former concert pianist, now 86, and confined to a private care facility on the Upper East Side. Graham had mentioned her once, in passing. I hadn't asked questions. It didn't feel like my place. But that morning, he knocked gently on the frame of my doorway. First time he'd done so since the day we married. "Would you like to meet her?" he asked. "Your mother?" "She's not well, but she remembers faces." I didn't ask why now. I just nodded and got dressed. The car ride was silent, but not uncomfortable. We passed rows of brownstones wrapped in ivy, school children laughing in uniforms, a woman walking a terrier in a yellow raincoat. Life, continuing. I watched Graham out of the corner of my eye. He looked tired, but not from lack of sleep. More like someone who had been carrying too much weight for too long. When we arrived, he didn't take my hand, but he opened the door for me. A small gesture. I held onto it like a thread. Claire's room was filled with soft light and softer edges, cream-colored blankets, vases of fresh flowers, a record player collecting dust in the corner. The scent of lavender clung gently to the curtains. She sat, by the window, wrapped in a pale blue shawl, her hands folded like petals on her lap. Her hair was silver, long and combed back into a loose braid. Her eyes, sharp, unexpectedly so, landed on me before Graham could speak. "Ah," she said, with a voice like wind through leaves. "So this is the wife." I blushed. She reached out a hand. I took it instinctively. Her skin was fragile, paper-thin, warm, familiar. "You have steady hands," she murmured, almost to herself. "That's good. Women need steady hands more than steady hearts." "Why?" I asked gently. "Because the heart will betray you," she said. "But the hand can still offer kindness." Graham shifted beside me but said nothing. Claire smiled, not at him, but at the silence between us. "He's quiet, isn't he?" she said. "Even as a boy, he never made noise unless he had to." "He still doesn't," I replied. She chuckled. "You'll have to teach him." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just sat beside her and poured her a cup of tea. She took it with both hands. "Green tea?" she asked, "with a little honey, just like his father used to make." Graham turned away, pretending to adjust the curtain. But I saw it, that sharp intake of breath, the kind you don't let out, because if you do, you'll start to break. After the visit, Graham didn't say much on the drive home, but as we pulled into the garage, he finally spoke. "She liked you," I smiled. "I liked her too." He nodded once, then looked out the window. "She's the only person left who knew me before I became this." I didn't ask what this meant. I didn't have to. Sometimes the person you become after grief is just the shape you had to make to survive it. That night, as I folded laundry in my room, I found a new towel on the edge of the dresser. It was soft, thick, hotel quality. A pale gray with my initials embroidered at the corner. I hadn't ordered it. It hadn't been there yesterday. I touched the embroidery with the back of my finger, then folded it neatly and placed it in the top drawer, like something earned, not gifted. I passed his study on the way to the kitchen. The door was ajar again. Inside, Graham sat at the desk, but this time, he wasn't working. He was sketching something. I leaned a little closer and saw the outline of a hand, slender fingers, a bracelet on the wrist, Claire's hand. He didn't look up, but he said, "You sat with her longer than anyone else has in months." She was easy to sit with. That's not always true, not for me. He put down the pencil and finally looked at me. She remembers things I'd rather forget. But you didn't flinch. I stepped into the room then. Just a little. Everyone has history, Graham. What matters is how they carry it. He nodded slowly, then added, almost like an afterthought, "Thank you for today." It was the first time he'd thanked me for anything, and oddly, it didn't sound forced. It sounded real. I made tea that night. Green. With a little honey. I poured 2 cups. One I left on the kitchen counter for him. The other I took to my room. And as I sat by the window, sipping quietly, I realized that some walls don't fall all at once. They soften. They lean. They let the light in, just enough to keep something alive. Maybe that's how love begins. Not with fireworks, but with a hand held gently in a quiet room and a cup of tea left without a word. It was a rainy Tuesday, the kind of rain that doesn't fall in sheets, but lingers, soft, misting, as if the sky had forgotten how to cry properly. Graham had left early that morning, no note, no word, just the usual quiet click of the front door. I didn't ask where he went anymore. I wasn't. Sure, I had the right to, but I knew he always returned. That morning I wandered. Not with purpose, just a need to move, to touch something that wasn't curated and cold. The penthouse was spotless, polished, hushed. A place built for looking, not for living. I found myself in the hallway we rarely used, the one near the back staircase. The air smelled different there, older somehow. Less floral, more wood and dust. That's where I found the door. It was plain white, without a label. Not locked. Just unnoticed. I turned the knob. Inside was a room unlike the eye, rest of the home. No glass, no steel, no symmetry. Just shelves, hundreds of them. A library. But not the kind you show to guests. This one was personal. Lived in. The spines were cracked, pages marked with pencil notes. On the far wall stood a desk. And above it, taped, not framed, was a photograph. It was slightly crooked, the edges curled. But what struck me wasn't its condition. It was the people. Graham was in it, younger, but unmistakably him. He stood beside a woman in a white sundress, laughing. Her hand was on his chest, her eyes were closed, and in her arms was a child. A baby, maybe 6 months old, nestled into her collarbone. There was no caption, no date. I stepped closer, drawn not by curiosity, but by a pull I couldn't explain. I'd never seen Graham smile like that. Not in real life, not even close. It was a different man in that picture, unguarded, unburdened, deeply, breathtakingly happy. And beside that photo, barely hanging on by a bent thumbtack, was a yellowing piece of paper. A birth announcement. Tiny. Footprints. A name I didn't recognize. Eleanor Whitmore. My breath caught. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood. There had been a child. That night I waited for Graham to return. I made tea. I set out 2 cups. I waited. He came home past 9, soaked at the collar, hair damp with rain. "You're in the library," he said as he passed me in the hall. I nodded. "I found the door." He didn't stop walking. But after a few seconds, his voice came, tired, flat. I never wanted to hide it. I just didn't want to explain it. I followed him into the room. He didn't turn on the lights. The city glow through the windows was enough. He poured himself a drink, just one. Whiskey, neat. Then he sat, one arm draped over the edge of the chair, like someone who'd fought too many battles with himself. "Her name was Amelia," he said. "The baby?" I asked. "No," he said quietly. "My wife." He took a sip, set the glass down without drinking again. "We weren't supposed to have children. Doctors said it was unlikely. Then Eleanor came." "What happened?" "They both died. A car accident. A stupid rainy day. I was supposed to pick them up." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I sat down across from him. Not too close, not far. He stared ahead, not at me. "I built this house so nothing could fall apart again, so nothing could move unless I allowed it." He looked at me then, and for the first time, his voice cracked. "And then you showed up, quiet, kind. You leave tea without asking. You sit with my mother like she's yours." And I started wondering what would happen if I let something move again. I felt something twist in my chest, a sadness that wasn't mine, but felt like it, lived beside my own. "You don't have to explain," I said softly. "But I want to." That stopped me. Graham Whitmore didn't say things he didn't mean. "I wasn't fair to you," he continued. "I told you this was a contract. I made it sound like safety. But it was just fear." He ran a hand through his damp hair. "I thought if I kept you at a distance, you'd never become something I could lose." A silence settled, not heavy. Not cold, just real. "I'm not here to replace anyone," I said. "I know. But I'm not going anywhere either. Not if you don't want me to." He looked at me then, really looked, like he'd been trying not to until now. Then quietly, "Don't want you to go." That was the first time I heard him ask for anything. That night, I returned to my room and took off the necklace I always wore, the one my mother had given me when I left home. I set it on the nightstand. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, and I saw not a wife in a contract, not a woman living someone else's life, but someone whose heart had finally been invited in, not pushed, not pulled, just seen. And that photograph, still crooked, still unframed, no longer felt like a secret. It felt like a doorway, and I had just stepped through it. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the air was still thick with something unspoken. I stood in the kitchen, barefoot, staring at the tea kettle as it hissed on the stove. The smell of green tea wrapped around me like a memory. I thought about packing, not because I wanted to leave, but because it was the first time I knew I could. The contract said 12 months. We were only 4 months in, but there was no clause for what to do when a quiet, grieving man began to show you his wounds, or when you stopped wanting to treat your presence as a favor. I poured the tea. Only 1 cup, and this time, I drank it alone. The decision came slowly, like fog lifting after a long night. I would not leave because I felt owed something. I would not stay because I felt responsible. I would stay because I wanted to. Because staying now felt like mine to give, and that changed everything. That afternoon, I took the train home. Not the one Graham offered to arrange, with a driver and tinted windows, but a regular commuter train that rattled and creaked and smelled faintly of old leather and coffee grounds. I needed to see my mother. I needed to remember why I said yes. In the first place, she was thinner than before, but her eyes still carried the same light, the kind that never dimmed, even in sickness. "Well," she said, smiling as I walked into her room. "You're either back for good, or you finally miss my soup." I laughed, then cried, then laughed again. We talked about everything: Ben's new obsession with chess, the neighbor's ridiculous cat, her memory slipping in places like puzzle pieces not quite clicking. But when I told her about Graham, really told her, she went quiet. "Does he make you smaller, Elena?" she asked. "No," I whispered. "He doesn't make me anything. He just lets me be." She nodded slowly. "Then stay. Stay until your stillness feels like home, not exile." That night, I sat by her bedside as she slept and read aloud from the worn paperback she loved, The Secret Garden. I could almost hear her voice layered with mine, humming through the pages. And when I returned to the city the next day, I didn't bring luggage. I brought a purpose. Graham was in the study when I walked in. His sleeves were rolled, glasses perched low on his nose, and a pencil rested between his fingers. "You came back," he said, like he hadn't expected to say it out loud. "I did." He stood, slowly. "Why?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted him to feel the weight of the pause. Then simply, "Not because I had to. Not because of the contract. Because this, it feels like a place worth choosing." He looked at me as if I had broken something in him. Something that needed to break. "I don't know how to be what you deserve." "I'm not asking for that," I said. "Just don't be less than who you are." He nodded, once, as if accepting a challenge more personal than any deal he'd ever signed. Days passed differently. After that, not louder, but softer. We still had separate rooms, but sometimes I'd find a fresh towel waiting outside my door, or a book I once mentioned left neatly on my nightstand. He still ate in silence, but now he waited for me before starting. One night I made soup, not from a recipe, just from memory. Carrots, celery, garlic. A bit of thyme, the way my mother used to make when my father came home late and tired. Graham didn't comment as he ate, but he went back for seconds. "You cooked," he said, as if it were news. I remembered how. He looked at me, long and quiet. It tastes like something I forgot existed, and I realized, in that moment, that healing doesn't come with fanfare. Sometimes, it comes in broth. Ben sent me another letter, this time through real mail, complete with a crooked stamp and 3 exclamation points. "Dear Lena, I built a birdhouse. It's terrible, but a robin flew into it anyway. I guess sometimes things don't have to be perfect to be useful." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my tea. Later that evening I told Graham about it. He smiled, barely, but it was real. "Smart kid." "He is," I said. "He gets it from my mother." "And what about you?" he asked. I paused. I think I'm still figuring out where I fit between the two of them. He looked at me, not through me. "Where you are is enough." That night, for the first time, he knocked on my door and didn't say anything. He just stood there. I opened it. "Can I sit?" he asked. I nodded. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. "I don't dream much anymore," he said, "but last night I did. I dreamed we were in the garden behind my mother's house. You were planting something. I didn't know what, but I wanted to stay." I touched his hand. He didn't flinch. "Then stay," I said. "You're allowed." Didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. He stayed until the lamp clicked off, until the moonlight poured in, until our breathing matched, until the silence between us finally felt like peace, not punishment. And for the first time since the day we met, I didn't feel like I was surviving someone else's life. I felt like I was living mine. Graham never said he loved me, not once, not even close. He wasn't the kind of man who believed in declarations. He believed in action, in precision, in doing the thing that needed to be done without asking for applause. But sometimes, love sounds like a suitcase left unpacked, or a jacket draped quietly over someone else's shoulders before they even realized they were cold. Sometimes love looks like him. It was a Friday morning when the call came. My mother's health had taken a sudden turn. A minor infection. Nothing dire, they said, but serious enough that the hospital asked for a family member to stay the night. I stood frozen in the hallway, phone pressed to my ear, panic flooding into my chest like cold water. Graham appeared, in the doorway of his study, already dressed, coffee mug in hand. He didn't ask questions. He just listened. Then he said, "I'll have the car ready in 5. "You have that presentation," I began. "It can wait." "It's your board, Graham. It's half your company. And she's your mother." He didn't say another word, just turned and disappeared down the hall, already making arrangements. He didn't need me to thank him. He didn't want credit. But something in me cracked a little deeper, watching him reprioritize his world without hesitation. That was love, I thought, even if he'd never call it that. We arrived at the hospital by noon. He stayed in the waiting room while I sat with my mother, held her hand, read to her again, this time from a poetry book she once loved in college. The pages were worn, the margins filled with notes in her own handwriting. Every so often, I glanced out the glass wall. Graham was still there, arms crossed, head tilted back, eyes closed. Not sleeping, just waiting. When the doctor came in, he nodded respectfully to Graham, then turned to me. "You're lucky. She's responding well, but we'll keep her overnight just in case." I breathed again. It wasn't until later that I realized Graham had never left, not once. Not even to eat. I brought him a coffee from the cafeteria, still warm. "You didn't have to wait," I said. "I know." He took the cup. Didn't drink it, just held it. "You care about her," I said. He met my eyes. "She raised you." That was all, but it felt like more. That night, back in the penthouse, I found a small bouquet of lilies on my nightstand. Not roses, not a grand gesture, just 3 pale white blooms, fresh, simple. There was a note. For the woman who shows up for everyone, else even when no one asks her to. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the words seep in. Graham didn't say love, but this was a language I could learn to speak. The next morning, we didn't eat in silence. I made pancakes, burned the first batch. He ate them anyway. "You're terrible at this," he said with a straight face. "It's your fault. You distracted me." "By existing?" "Exactly." He almost smiled. Almost. But it was his eyes that gave him away. They softened. Not fully, but enough. That afternoon, he took me to a place I didn't know existed. A small house 2 hours outside the city, nestled among trees that had started to turn gold with the first signs of autumn. "It was my parents' place," he said. "I haven't been here in years. Why now? Because I want you to see where I started, before I forgot who I was." The house was modest. Not a mansion, not curated, but warm. Photographs on the walls. A piano missing 2 keys. A swing in the backyard still slightly crooked. He didn't narrate the memories. He just let me walk through them, touching the chipped banister, smelling the faint trace of cedar in the closet. In one room, I found a box of baby things, booties, a knit hat, a blanket with Eleanor stitched in blue thread. He stood behind me, hands in pockets, silent. "You kept it," I said. I didn't know what else to do. I turned to him. You grieve alone, Graham. All the time. Even when people are right here. He didn't argue. Instead, he said, I'm trying not to. That was the bravest thing he'd ever said to me, and maybe the most loving. On the way home, we didn't talk much, but he reached across the center console and rested his hand on mine for nearly half the drive. Not a gesture for comfort, but for presence. And I let it stay there. Because I wanted it there. Because his hand, so rarely open, had finally found something it wasn't afraid to hold. That evening, as the sky turned violet and the lights of the city began to shimmer below us, Graham stood on the balcony with a glass of wine in his hand. I joined him, shoulder to shoulder. I'm still learning, he said. So am I. I won't always get it right. Neither will I. He turned to face me. But I will keep showing up. I didn't say anything. I just stepped forward and rested my head against his chest. And he let out a breath so long, it felt like he'd been holding it for years. We stayed like that. Two people who hadn't said the words, but lived them anyway. It happened on a Tuesday, not unlike the day we married. Clear skies, no fanfare, no reason for anything to feel different, except it did. I woke to the sound of the kettle whistling. Not mine, his. When I padded into the kitchen, still wrapped in my robe, Graham was pouring hot water into 2 mugs. No housekeeper, no catering tray. Just him, barefoot, sleeves rolled, face soft in the morning light. You always make the tea, I said, more curious than accusing. Thought I'd return the favor, he replied. He slid a mug toward me. No sugar, just the way I liked it. I took a sip. It wasn't perfect, a bit too steeped, a little bitter. But it was real. Honest. It's awful. I smiled. You're welcome, he said. We sat in silence after that. The good kind. Later that day, I cleaned out a drawer in the hallway. It had once been filled with spare cables, old receipts, and instruction manuals for appliances long gone. Now, it held something else. Small things that belonged to me. A scarf. A book I read over and over as a child. A pack of ginger tea Ben sent me last month. And tucked into the corner, the necklace my mother gave me. The one I took off the night I decided to stay. I hadn't worn it since. But I hadn't been able to part with it either. It felt less like armor now. More like a souvenir from a version of myself that finally felt distant. In the evening, Graham came into my room, not knocking, just standing in the doorway, quiet. Do you still want your own space? He asked. Do you? He didn't answer right away. Then, I think I've had enough of empty rooms. So that night we moved 1 box. Just one. A drawer of books, a robe, a pair of slippers I never wore but kept anyway. Nothing grand, but everything real. The next morning, I found him sitting at the piano. It hadn't been touched in years, according to him. Dust had gathered between the keys. But he was there, hands resting on ivory, not playing, just feeling. I sat beside him. I never learned, I said. Me neither. He smiled. But he pressed 1 key, then another, a simple melody, broken, hesitant, but enough. My mother taught herself after my father passed, he said. She said the house needed to hear something beautiful again. And now? Now I want to hear what this house sounds like when it's lived in. We didn't need music to make the room feel full. Just presence, just breath. That afternoon, a letter arrived from Ben. This time it wasn't crooked. The envelope was neatly sealed. Inside was a photo, a picture of the birdhouse he built. Now painted bright red, with a tiny welcome sign above the hole. A robin sat perched on the edge, wings tucked in, completely at peace. Still not perfect, the note read, but now it has a name, We call it the staying place. I showed it to Graham. He looked at the photo for a long time. Then he turned to me and said, "I want that. Whatever that is." "What?" "A place where people stay." We didn't burn the contract. We didn't need to. One night, I pulled it from the drawer where it had been gathering dust. Graham didn't ask what I was doing. He just watched. I folded it slowly, not with finality, but with peace. Then I tucked it into the back of one of his books, The Art of War, of all things. It felt right, because this was no longer about winning or keeping or proving anything. This was about being. Later that week, he did something I never expected. He called Ben, not just once, but again and again. They talked about chess, about books, about the ridiculous cat that kept stealing socks from their neighbor's porch. I didn't listen in. I just sat nearby, listening to the sound of Graham laughing, a rare, quiet laugh, like something new being born in his chest. "You're good at that," I said afterward. "At what?" "Letting people in." He looked surprised, but not unsure. "Had a good teacher," he said. "She left tea on the counter every morning, even when no one asked her to." The first time he said, "I love you," I didn't hear it. It wasn't out loud. It was in the way he reached for my hand in his sleep, the way he folded my cardigan over the back of the chair so it wouldn't wrinkle, the way he placed my mother's photo next to his father's on the shelf in the living room, without a word. That was his love. Not poetic, not public, but steady, unshakable, the kind that stayed. 1 year after the day we married, we went back to his parents' house. The swing still creaked in the wind. The piano still held 2 missing keys, but something had changed. We brought new frames with us, one for Eleanor, one for Amelia, and finally, one for us. Not a wedding photo, not a posed shot, just one taken on a Tuesday morning, sunlight falling, through the kitchen window, Graham pouring 2 strong tea into 2 chipped mugs. I placed it on the windowsill. "It's not perfect," I said. "No," he smiled. "It's better. Because we stayed." And maybe that's what home really is. Not a place with doors and walls and names on mailboxes, but the quiet miracle of someone choosing, again and again, not to leave. If this story moved you, even just a little, please give it a like, and consider subscribing for more. Every click helps me keep sharing these quiet, powerful moments that remind us we're not alone. Thank you for listening.